Donald Trump, Antichrist. The Art of What Deal, Part 1. In the last presentation, we gave you an introduction to the Antichrist of the Bible. In this presentation, we'll break down the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel and speculate why we believe Donald Trump will be the one to confirm Daniel's covenant with many. But again, what's the point? The point's clear and simple. If you're convinced that the Antichrist may be here in the flesh, and that the fulfillment of certain end times prophecies are close, then what would you do? If you're a Christian, would you start to get more serious about your faith? If you're not a Christian, would you start to reevaluate your belief system and consider taking the Bible more seriously? I would hope so. The point of these presentations is to help you realize the reality of Bible prophecy and its ultimate fulfillment before it's too late. Daniel's 70 weeks. In the last presentation, we broke down Daniel's covenant with many, explaining that it will be a future peace deal between Israel and many different nations. The one who will confirm or broker this deal will be the Antichrist, and it will be for 1 week. The 1 week isn't actually a literal week of 7 days, but a week of years. We know this because of the 70 weeks prophecy given to Daniel by the angel Gabriel. The 70 weeks prophecy is broken up into 3 separate blocks of weeks. 7 weeks, 49 years, 62 weeks, 434 years, and the final week of 7 years. So the total amount of the 70 weeks equals 490 years. When the commandment went forth to rebuild Jerusalem, that would start this 70-week clock, and after the 62-week block, totaling 69 weeks when you add in the first 7-week block, it said the Messiah would be cut off or die. The purpose of this prophecy is stated in Daniel 9:24 of the King James Version. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. 70 weeks chart. This chart gives us a visual timeline of Daniel's 70 weeks. The 70-week clock began on 445 BC at the decree of Artaxerxes. And again, these are weeks of years. So from that decree until the death of Christ, we have a total of 483 years, representing 69 of the 70 weeks. The final 70th week will begin when the Antichrist confirms his covenant with many peace deal at some point in the, I believe, near future. But before that happens, the rapture, or the catching up away of the church, will occur. The gap between the rapture and the covenant with many peace deal is unknown, but I personally believe it won't be more than 1 year. The final 70th week. The final 70th week of Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy will begin at the confirmation of the covenant with many, which will again be a Middle East centered peace deal that will be brokered, signed, confirmed by the Antichrist. However, halfway through, or 3.5 years in, the Antichrist will break the terms of that deal. The abomination of desolation that Jesus spoke of in Matthew chapter 24, verse 15 of the King James Version will occur when the Antichrist breaks the terms of that deal by stopping the sacrifices and the oblation. He will then seek to install himself in the temple so that he can be worshipped as God, as Paul states in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4 of the KJV. And this is the verse, the main prophetic verse that I focus on, as it tells us about that peace deal, who signs it, and what happens when it's broken. That verse is Daniel 9:27 of the King James Version. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrificing and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. 7-year tribulation, final 70th week chart. And here I'm going to give you a little chart or breakdown of the final 70th week. So the 7-year tribulation begins with the Antichrist's covenant with many. 3.5 years in, the Antichrist breaks the terms of that deal by stopping the sacrifices and the oblation, which leads to the abomination of desolation. And finally, at the end of the 7-year tribulation, Jesus comes back and defeats the Antichrist along with his false prophet. So what about Trump? I'm getting there. I just wanted to give you a clear understanding of the prophetic times I believe we're headed into. Now let's go over a couple major points that I believe we have to take into consideration when speculating who could be a candidate for the Antichrist, with a focus on Daniel's covenant with many. Political power. The Antichrist will have to be in a position of political power. Why? Well, how else is he going to be able to negotiate the deal of the century? Peace deals with other nations get done by politicians because they are in prime positions of power. Relationship with Israel. The Antichrist, if he's a politician outside of Israel, will have to have a good relationship with Israel. Why? Because why else would Israel let another politician negotiate peace for them if they thought that they didn't have Israel's best interests in mind? U.S. President. The Antichrist, in my opinion, is likely to be a U.S. president. Why? Well, what political position is the most powerful in the world? It's not the leader of China or Russia. It's the leader of the free world, the President of the United States. The U.S. is the most powerful country economically and militarily, which makes it the most powerful politically. And which country also happens to have the best relationship with Israel? By far? That would be the U.S. So the president, who's the most powerful politician in the world, also happens to be the best and most powerful political friend that Israel could have. Thick as thieves. So just how close are the U.S. and Israel? Very close. I won't get into too much detail because that's a whole presentation on its own, but here's some info from the U.S. State Department's website, which should give you some insight. I've linked that below. U.S.-Israel relations. The U.S. was the first country to recognize Israel as a state in 1948, and the first to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in 2017. Israel is a great partner to the U.S., and Israel has no greater friend than the U.S. Americans and Israelis are united by our shared commitment to democracy, economic prosperity, and regional security. The unbreakable bond between our two countries has never been stronger. A long-standing U.S. priority is to promote a comprehensive and lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The United States is also committed to encouraging increased cooperation and normalization of ties between Israel and Arab and Muslim majority states, as exemplified by the Abraham Accords and normalization agreements between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. Notice how the second paragraph focuses on the normalization of ties between Israel and Arab and Muslim majority states. Trump and Israel, a unique relationship, page 1 of 3. So I understand that Trump isn't in power right now, and that he's not in the most powerful position in the world, but he was. The Trump 2024 presentation will come soon enough, but for now, we're going to take a look at Trump's unique relationship with Israel while he was in power. On the right, we see Trump signing the Jerusalem Embassy Act, as on December 6, 2017, President Trump decided to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, officially recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And he had this to say: "Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel." And on the next day, December 7th, Trump had this to say about the embassy's move and how it relates to peace in the region. "Above all, our greatest hope is for peace, the universal yearning in every human soul. With today's action, I reaffirm my administration's long-standing commitment to a future of peace and security for the region. What's interesting is the words that he used there, peace and security. Someone else also uses those words. It's Paul in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3 of the King James Version. But he says, when they shall say peace and safety, sudden destruction shall come upon them. And Paul's using that verse when speaking about the end times in Jerusalem and also Israel. Trump and Israel, a unique relationship, page 2 of 3. Donald Trump Square was inaugurated on July 3, 2019, to thank Trump for his support of Israel. U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman had this to say. President Trump deeply cares about Israel, and it is clear to him Israelis understand and value this, and know these feelings are mutual. Petah Tikva Mayor Rami Greenberg said at the unveiling of this Donald Trump Square, Israel never had a president who was as supportive and helpful as U.S. President Donald Trump. But in a weird twist, the residents of Petah Tikva woke up to find the fountain in its Donald Trump Square spurting fake blood after vandals added dye to the waters in a protest against U.S.-backed West Bank annexation plans. This was said, annexation will cost us in blood, and it was graffitied in red at the site. Now when I saw that, I immediately thought of the verse in Revelation 14:20, where it says that blood will flow up to the horses' bridles. So, is that kind of a foreshadowing? Maybe. Trump and Israel, a unique relationship, page 3 of 3. There's no question Trump's voice on Israeli affairs has been a good thing for us, said Dulan Abu Saleh, the mayor of the largest Druze town in the Golan Heights. Trump's a true friend of Israel, said Chaim Rokach, the head of the Golan Heights Regional Council that is overseeing the fledgling Trump Heights initiative in Brooklyn. Michael Makovsky conceded that Trump has gone beyond other presidents on Israel. Trump has probably been the most pro-Israel president since Harry Truman recognized Israel. That was said by political analyst Bill Schneider to news outlet The Hill. All of these quotes I found from one USA Today article. And what was the title of that article? Israel Settlements. Donald Trump proves he's the king of Israel. So, needless to say, Trump is highly esteemed in Israel. Abraham Accords. So we've broken down the 70 weeks of Daniel and the final last week of 7 years, which will begin when the Antichrist confirms his deal of the century for Israel. We've also speculated why we believe that the Antichrist will most likely be a U.S. president. In this slide, we'll take a quick look at the Abraham Accords declaration. On September 15, 2020, the UAE and Bahrain agreed to the Abraham Accords declaration. Also, on October 23, 2020, Sudan agreed to normalize relations with Israel. And on December 10, 2020, Morocco followed suit and agreed to normalize relations as well. So within a span of 4 months, 4 majority Muslim countries agreed to peace deals with Israel. Whose administration was behind these peace deals? And who signed off on these deals? U.S. President Trump did. Are these deals the deal of the century? No. But are they a sign of what's to come? I believe that they are. Recap in part 2. So I believe, based off the information I've just presented, that Donald Trump is the best possible candidate to be the one to broker the deal of the century. And since whoever brokers that deal is the Antichrist, I believe that Donald Trump is the best possible candidate to be the Antichrist. This is all contingent on him getting back into office, which I believe will happen during the next election. 3 major points to consider. Trump, as a U.S. president, had built-in diplomatic ties with Israel like no other country does. Trump, while in office, developed a uniquely close relationship with Israel. And Trump, while in office, brokered and helped to bring to fruition the Abraham Accords, which are serving to prep the Middle East for the ultimate deal of the century. If Trump does come back into power after the 2024 elections, then it puts him in a prime position to build on the Abraham Accords that he brokered, and broker his deal of the century. In part 2, we'll continue to speculate on why we believe Donald Trump will be the one to broker Daniel's covenant with many. Trump 666 on Reddit. And don't forget to visit Trump 666 on Reddit, where we speculate on why we believe that Donald Trump is the Antichrist. I hope you guys found this presentation insightful and informative, and I'm going to try to get out part 2 as soon as possible. God bless, and have a great day.